Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. These classes every week are in honor of two mothers who passed away last year, Leora Azuri and also um, Kaya Sarah Malka. Sarah Malka Goldberg. So may this Shama have a great aliyah. We're doing something very special this coming Sunday, um, and also honoring Leora, especially this brightness of bright day of Hanukkah. So Sunday morning there's going to be a Rosh Chodesh Hallel over here, music and dancing. It's going to be very powerful. And then continuing on with a Sudas Rosh Chodesh and a breakfast, and afterwards a class for an hour and a half from the various different Hasidic teachers from all the branches of Hasidism. A little thought, 8 thoughts on Hanukkah. We're calling it the Hasidic Menorah, going through teachings from each segment of the Hasidic world. And while that's happening, outside of it is going to be a super carnival for kids. So it's December 25th. Not much is happening. No one can go anywhere. Nothing is open. So it's a beautiful event. And anybody that wants to come join us. We also can use some extra sponsorship for that. It's a no-charge event. So anybody that would like to help in honor of Leora, that would be really special and appreciative. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's the evening, and this is the day. Yes. The sign is on the door.
Thank you. I'm sorry I did it car before the house.
We'll announce it this week also.
Correct. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know Hanukkah is busy, and for some people, the whole week of Hanukkah just absolutely cancels out. I know for me, parts of my week was like that. So thank you all for being here. And I'm excited to dive into Perek Dalet with you. Before we do, I just thought it would be nice to, again, think about the time that we are in, which is the week of Hanukkah. I know for myself that today is the third day of Hanukkah, and soon it's going to be the fifth Lichtel, the 5th night of Hanukkah. And the reason why that's so special is it's that one night where you finally see that the menorah is filling up with light. And for me, I always have mixed feelings about this because for me, like as soon as you cross over the Shamish, it's like, oh no, Hanukkah's almost over. But what is so beautiful, according to Hasidus and according to, I guess, a more Hasidic perspective, is that there is now more light. There's more godly energy. There's more spirituality in the world because we've brought it down, we've grounded it with this mitzvah of Hanukkah. And that's something for us to focus on and to celebrate. So not just are we supposed to be looking towards what we could do and how we can add in greatness and spread more light, but it's also important, and I think that we have this a lot when we're looking at the menorah, to also celebrate what we've done so far. We've lit the first night, we've lit the second night, we've lit the third night, fourth night, now we're up to the 5th night, and now we've had that crossover the Shamish. We've done 5 lights instead of just 4, or less than, meaning 4 and 4 would be even. Less than 4 would obviously be more darkness. We've come to that space where it's even more light, and we have to celebrate that. Celebrate the win, celebrate the wonderful things that we've done, what we've created here, and show Hashem that we are willing and happy to push forth to bring more light into this world. But if we're in a constant state of pushing ourselves, then we can lose hope. We could become exhausted. So it's really important to stop and celebrate. And I think that's what Hanukkah is all about, really stopping, reflecting, meditating on the beauty of what we have, the light that we bring to the world. And then, of course, increasing in spreading that light. So that's just a brief thought about Hanukkah and important to think about. Okay, now let's jump into Perek Dalet. So before we do, I just want to do a brief summary of what we've done up until now. Some people have been here since the beginning, some people, and maybe someone online has never seen this class before. So it's important to just understand a little bit of the flow of what's happening in this class. Because this series is cumulative, it's important to kind of know where the Duality is trying to bring us. So welcome everybody, come right in, take something to eat. It's supposed to be a very comfortable learning atmosphere with children and eating alike. So Feel comfortable. So very quickly, a summary of Parak Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. We know that the Alter Rebbe wrote this Tanya in order for it to be a safer Shel Beinanim. It's supposed to be a safer for the intermediate, which means it's the safer for the person who is the betweener, the in-betweener, who's constantly in the state of flux, who's constantly struggling. He's not perfect. He's not deemed a tzaddik. He's not a rasha, because that would be too extreme and too harsh. Instead, it's written for the person who can at any moment choose greatness over darkness, choose light over darkness. So the idea that the Baal Tanya is bringing to us here is the idea that we always have possibility. We always have potential. Our Neshama is geared towards potential. And the more we choose it, the more we are aligning ourselves with Hashem and with our purpose and with our Neshama. So how do we do that though? Because I know I could do it for 10 seconds, but it's very hard to constantly be extending that 10 seconds to another 10 seconds. It's possible. We know that it's possible. The Baal Tanya says that it's possible. And we know ourselves, if we really shorten our entire life into just the next 5 seconds, I'm doing pretty great, right? I could be a tzaddik in this moment where I'm just thinking holy and pure thoughts, and I'm in a Torah class, and I'm writing notes, and I'm focused, right? I'm doing great. And if I extend that towards the rest of my day, then that's wonderful too. But then when we think long run of my entire life spread out before me, I just don't see that as practical. I don't think that I could actually do that. So the Baal Tanya is trying to bring us 53 chapters of how to practically implement the idea that I can live with Hashem in my life constantly, with every action that I take, with every bracha that I make, whatever it is that I'm doing, I could bring him and the realization that he is my creator into every aspect of my life. So we started out with the very first question of, well, if we want to grow and if we want to be somebody, who are we first? So in Parak Aleph and Beis, the Alter Rebbe starts talking about what is a human being? Who are we? And he explains that we are human, and at the same time we have 2 neshamas. And from there, he speaks about the neshama, the nefesh Bahamas, and the nefesh Elokis, and we spoke about that the past few weeks. In Parak Gimel, he talks about how both of those neshamas have 10 spheres, 10 different attributes, 10 different modes of expression. These are ways that the neshama expresses itself to the world. It's the way that it lets the world know who it is, how it wants to express itself, okay? So those are all expressions and attributes. Parak Daled, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is the way that the neshama interacts with the world. What tools does it use to actually have an interaction with the physical world? Okay, so Parak Beis was talking about who are we? What are the neshamas? Parak Gimel is, it's kind of like the makeup of the neshamas, but how the neshama expresses itself. And Parak Daled is what tools the neshama uses for that expression. How does it interact with the world? And we're going to be talking about what that looks like. But before we do, I want to first dive into the mashal that the Alter Rebbe uses to tell us what that tool is. So the tools that we interact with the world are our thoughts, speech, and action. Those are the way that we interact with the world. So thoughts are the way a person speaks to himself or interacts with himself. Speech is the way that person interacts with another human being. And action is the way that a person interacts with the world. So the way I interact with inanimate things like holding my purse or pushing a button, right? That's my interaction with other stuff, with the world. So thought, speech, and action are the ways that my neshama is going to be expressed into this world. It's the way that the body is expressing the neshama. Now, the way the Alter Rebbe describes this is the neshama has a garment, and that garment are the thought, speech, and action. Why does the Alter Rebbe use this very interesting example of garment, a beged? There's 2 different reasons why he uses it, and the mashal is really brilliant because it kind of like follows through. Not always do you give an example and every aspect of the example follows through. Most examples, and probably in this one too, you could find fault in. But with this example, it really expresses what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say. The thought, speech, and action of a human being, of the neshama, are garments to his soul. Why? Because what does a garment do? A garment expresses the person. When I'm wearing something, it's actually funny, I was wearing something the other day. It was like a big vest, like a big jean vest. And I got it just because it was practical. It was like a very practical reason why I got it. I wanted to become whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is that's why I got it. And someone saw me in it and he was like, what's the whole something vibe? I don't even know what he was referring to, but apparently it was like some sort of alignment with a certain type of person. So it wasn't like gothic, but like imagine if someone's wearing like some sort of like gothic boots, like very big heels, and it's black and it's clunky, right? So it's very goth. That's the way they're expressing themselves in the world. For me, what was funny just in the story was I had no idea what I was expressing myself to the world as, because I didn't know that there was an association with this vest. But the idea is that the way that we dress is a mode of expression, and it's the way that we are defining ourselves. Just like a garment kind of gives definition to your body and allows, well, not really with a shawl, but like with most clothes, it allows your body to have a form, right? It covers the body, but at the same time, it gives your body form. In the same way, it also gives another person an idea of how you want to express yourself, how you are expressing a certain part of your personality, right? So, and we all know this, right? Different ways that we dress actually could affect our own behavior. So if I'm wearing heels, I'll start feeling more refined. And if I'm wearing my jogging shoes, then I'll just be looser with my body because that's what I'm experiencing right now. So in ways, our clothes also deeply affect us. But what's really important about this mashal is the first aspect, which is our clothes give definition, they give us shape, and they also express a part of ourselves, our personality, how we want to show people who we are. Right? I know for myself, when I was growing up, my mother always used to say, like when it came to tznius, her approach to it was, well, what are you trying to bring to the world? Like, how do you want to express yourself to the world? It wasn't like, oh, you have to cover this and you have to do that. She wasn't so much about the stringency of it. She was more, well, what are you trying to present? Because that is what your clothes are. They're representing who you are. If you want to present yourself as this way, fine. Just know that that's how you're presenting yourself. I always thought it was like a very beautiful approach towards clothes in general. Just realize that this is what you're aligning yourself with. Okay. Now, the other part of clothing, and this is another aspect of the mashal that Chassidus very much brings this mashal of clothing into. When we clothe ourselves, we're also enveloping the body, right? So we wear our clothes, especially now it's a little bit cold in LA. We wear our clothes to keep ourselves warm. So it's like an envelopment. It's covering up. It's containing. It's keeping safe, right? Those different aspects of beged also translate into thought, speech, and action. So how do they translate? Our thought, speech, and action are the garments of the soul because it's easy to understand that they will express who we are. So the way that I think, the way that I speak, the way that I act reflects who I am really on the inside, right? So if I'm the type of person who wants to live according to Hashem's purpose, then my thoughts are going to be more godly oriented. My words are going to be more godly oriented. My actions are supposed to be, hopefully, going to be mitzvahs. If my internal world is much more aligned with anything, depends, right? Like, I don't want to give examples because it starts getting messy, but depending on whatever your internal world is and whatever you're aligning yourself with, that's what your thought, speech, and action is going to look like, right? So what's very important is that are our thought, speech, and action, are our clothes reflecting who we really are? Are our garments, the garments that we wear, our thought, speech, and action, are they really reflecting our neshama? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Now, what's interesting is we have two sets of thought, speech, and action, just like we were talking last week about two different systems of governance when it comes to the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis, because both Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis are both trying to rule our body. So therefore, both Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis have their own beged. They both have their own set of thought, speech, and action. So I could be here right now learning Torah with you, learning Chassidus with you, and right now the system, the mode of government right now is Manisham, Nefesh Elokis. That's what I'm tapped into right now. That's the energy that I'm in right now. and I'm expressing that Ashama right now with my thoughts being involved with Hashem's words and my speech being involved with Tanya, and my actions are I'm grounded here with you teaching a class. However, if you were to, if something popped up on my screen and let's say it was a puzzle or a math game or something else, then all of a sudden my entire being switches over. At my core, I switch over to a different mode of governance, which is the thought, speech, and action of my Nefesh Bahamas. And again, to remind you, Nefesh Bahamas is not anything bad, right? What are the qualities of the Nefesh Bahamas? The Nefesh Bahamas it's farsighted, right? So it can't, I always mix this up. It can't see far, it can't see beyond itself. It's very much selfish. It's very much, my life is about me. And it also, the other characteristic that we were speaking about last time was another characteristic of Nefesh Bahamas is there's anxiety, there's worry involved with the Nefesh Bahamas. Why? Because he's not far-seeing. So therefore, he can't understand that there's reasons beyond his understanding, that there's a God in the world, that there's a plan, right? So there's no bitachon, there's no trust, there's no stability, there's no grounding. The Nefesh Bahamas, like an animal, is constantly feeling instinct, right? What can I do to survive? That survival mode is very much a part of our being. That's how we feel all the time, because that's what our Nefesh Bahamas is experiencing. So what's interesting to note just right here, right now, when we're talking about the begadim, is the idea that our bodies, ourselves, are constantly fluctuating between the Nefesh Bahamas and the Nefesh Elokis. So right now I'm in the Nefesh Elokis, but in a second when that text message comes up or that meme pops up on my phone, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with God, so I shift it into Nefesh Bahamas gear, and from there the conversation or the interaction continues being a Nefesh Bahamas one. Right? That mode of expression, the thought, speech, and action that is linked to the Nefesh Bahamas, I'm in that mode right now. Now, what if that moment I decide, okay, I'm going to make a bracha and eat this cookie, so I'm going to elevate this piece of food for God, and I'm remembering that I'm a Jew. So again, I switched back into my Nefesh Elokis. But what's interesting to note is how exhausting that is to be constantly fluctuating between these two different modes of interacting with the world. Either my thoughts are Nefesh Bahamas or my thoughts are Nefesh Elokis. My actions are Nefesh Bahamas or the Nefesh Elokis. My speech is Nefesh Bahamas, Nefesh Elokis. Sometimes it's very confusing. Which one is it coming from? I don't know where I am. Which again, just adds on to the idea of the confusion that we're experiencing constantly, the fluctuation that we're experiencing constantly, which could also feed into more of the anxiety and worry that we're feeling because we don't feel grounded, right? So it's very important to realize and to really acknowledge that this is part of our human experience. This is who we are, and that's okay. We don't have to feel like just because I'm feeling worried or fear or completely unsettled, that there's something deeply wrong with me. There's something deeply right with you. It just means that you're a human being and you have an Nefesh Bahamas. And because I'm constantly trying to navigate this world, and because I deeply want to navigate this world from a Nefesh Elokis place, and I'm constantly veering back to a space of Nefesh Bahamas, it's disheartening. And shame comes along with it, and fear comes along with it. And at the same time, it's also interesting to note is how easy it is to fluctuate, right? So just because it's your garments, and we all know how easy it is to change our garments, on, off, constantly, right? So the advantage is the disadvantage. The disadvantage, which makes us feel worried and not grounded, and I'm constantly fluctuating between the two, which is scary and doesn't feel settled. That's the disadvantage. But the advantage of it being a garment is wonderful. It's that now I also know that the second I have a thought that's maybe more linked to my Nefesh Bahamas, again, it's not necessarily bad, it could just be neutral, it's not altruistic, I could also immediately switch that over to something that is godly. I can make this thought, maybe someone sent me a meme that it's kind of just neutral, maybe it's just psychology, pop psychology, but now I can maybe apply it to my relationship with my child and make it godly. Right? So the idea is that it shouldn't be disheartening for you, it should be in ways empowering to you. Yes, this is our struggle. And at the same time, here's the way that I can navigate it. So this parak is so crucial to deeply understand, because our garments, our thought, speech, and action are our most powerful tools to utilize in our everyday lives. It's very hard to start contemplating on my neshama, my nefesh elokis, how I'm intrinsically connected to Hashem, and nothing can change that, and basically carry that throughout my entire day. It's challenging. That's what we're going through all the time. That's why we're here trying to learn a different way, because we've been trying to do that and it's a little bit challenging. So here's a different way of doing things, right? Here's the Alter Rebbe being really grounded and practical. You don't have to necessarily make sure that you're thinking about Hashem every single second of your day. At least your actions can be reflecting Him. And not every single second of your day, but as much as you can try. Right? So here, I always think about how practical and how human the Alter Rebbe brings these lofty concepts of Chassidus to me, this mortal person, very human person down here, and makes it super practical. What can you do? Well, I could just understand that my actions reflect who I am. And who I really am at my core is my nefesh elokis. And I also have this other struggle, and I have lots of chatter in my head, and I have this really powerful pull towards nefesh bahamis. And at the same time, I could switch my garments on and off all the time. That's always my prerogative, and it's always something I could do in a blink of an eye. So however remote or however far it feels from you to feel godly or aligned with your nefesh elokis, that's the Yetzer Hara speaking. Because it's not remote from you. It's not far from you. You could always just do an action, and within a second, you are changing your garments and aligning yourself with your nefesh elokis. So again, we were talking from 5 classes ago, where the Alter Rebbe is trying to say, this is his modus operandi for the entire book, which is Kikara v'lecha hadavar ma'id b'ficha u'b'vavcha la'aseh. It's a line in Devarim which says that it is very close to you to serve Hashem with love and fear, and to do the mitzvahs constantly. And the question that came up for us there was, it doesn't feel like it's very easy. And now throughout this entire sefer, the Alter Rebbe is going to again and again bring practical advice, how to make it relatable and easy for you to implement being a vehicle for God, being someone who can work towards his relationship with God or aligning himself with his nefesh elokis. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, beautiful. So I want to give you just a few different examples, just a few different stories, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the neshama. Okay? Actually, we'll switch it. I'll talk to you about the neshama, and then we'll talk about those stories. So back to Parak Beis. There's different parts of our neshama, and Parak Gimel, there's different parts of our neshama. There's the Yechida that is untouchable, unchangeable, immeasurable, that feels like it is never disconnected from God. And then there are other parts of our neshama that go through a whole developmental stage, a bunch of stages, until it is actually grounded in our body. And it's very hard for us to understand it and wrap our minds around it. But what's important actually to understand is that there's 5 different parts of the neshama, and one part is immutable. The other parts are also unchangeable. You can't change the neshama. But what happens is it goes through a series of, it's almost like a processing, right? So the food that we eat has been processed, and it goes through many different changes in order to finally come to our table. Even the fruits and vegetables that we eat. I don't know if you've ever been to a farm, or if you ever actually seen a fruit that grows on a tree. I know for myself, the first time that I picked an apple from a tree, I started crying. I never had that experience before. Like, to hold the apple while it's still attached to its life force, and then to pull it, and then now it's a gift to me. Right? Like, that whole idea is something is so remote from us now. It's crazy, because we just go to Ralph's, right? You could just totally disconnect from the fact that this fruit or this vegetable actually came from somewhere and was developed by someone, and God made it happen for you. So in ways, we're very detached from processes. But our neshama goes through a process to come down into our very physical body. And parts of our neshama are living the experience of God constantly. And there are parts of neshama that are very much linked to our body, our personality, who we are, what makes us different. right? So we were saying that nefesh, ruach, neshama, each of them reflects different parts of ourselves, our intellectual self, our action-oriented self, our emotional self. So already you could see that the neshama has gone through some sort of processing, right? It's linked to something very worldly, like thoughts and thinking. Those are all creations. Those are all things that are apart from God, as opposed to the yechida, which is intrinsically Hashem. So what's important to realize about that is that because the levushim are the garments of the soul and they reflect the soul, okay, they're very much connected to the soul, and at the same time, they're also very grounded in our world. So to make this practical, right? So when I do an action and I'm teaching this class right now, the fact that I'm teaching this class is action, and it's also speech and it's thoughts, okay? So it's all three of them. The idea behind that is it feels like, okay, it's just a class right now. I prepared a class and I'm here teaching it to you. But you have to also understand that because it's a garment to my neshama, and my neshama is very much linked to thought, speech, and action, it means that it's drawing energy from that neshama. Again, just like last class, it's so important to realize that our neshama is not just like this glimmer of light that's removed from us, that's somewhere lost in my body or above my body. It's very much there. And a part of it has gone through a creative process, right? And because it has gone through a creative process, in a way, is part of creation, and in a way it's not, it's part of Hashem. It has this duality of being Hashem and one and the same with Hashem, part of him, and also in this physical world doing physical things, like two most remote things, the two extremes it has at the same time. So what's really important to understand, and again, the Alter Rebbe is trying to bridge gaps, is he's trying to show you that everything starts with the neshama. Why? Because the neshama has that total godly part of itself, and then that part of itself that's also very much grounded in you putting a penny into the tzedakah box. Where did that action come from? It went through a whole process, but it's literally directly coming from a part of your neshama. So again, it's in order for us to feel connected to who we truly are. Oftentimes I'll think, okay, fine, I'll just put the penny in the tzedakah box. Let's say I did it without kavana. Let's say I did it without intention, or I did it even, let's say, for bad reasons, right? So I gave tzedakah because this guy called me, he's having a campaign and it's a match and I just have to do it. So I feel pressured and I give the money, right? So it's like it has bad intentions. I was pressured into doing it. I didn't want to do it. I feel resentful for doing it. This is not me, but I've heard this before. The idea is that I don't have good kavanas while I'm doing it. And still, the fact that I did that action, because the neshama is linked, it also has that creation aspect to it. It's linked to that very, very far action from what seems like God itself, right? So what's very important to realize is that duality, that the neshama has both. It's a creation, and at the same time, it's part of Hashem. And that part of it, that's a creation, that's where we want to start connecting ourselves to with our thought, speech, and action. Because the more that we could feel relatable to the neshama, the more we could say, okay, who am I? I don't feel like a godly soul. But if I could start feeling like, okay, I do feel like my thoughts, I can relate to my mind, I can definitely relate to my emotions, and my actions are easy to relate to. I see them happening around me. And to realize that that actually comes from my neshama, then my neshama is making that happen. It's the mode of operation in my body. So now I can start realizing that my neshama is very much a part of who I am. And these last steps that I'm very aware to, so the feeling that I feel, the action that I take, the thought that comes to mind, those are very relatable because they're very immediate. They're in ways like superficial. Those are coming from somewhere. And the more I reach back to them, the more I'm attuning myself to my neshama. Yes? Okay. So what's important to understand is that our behaviors are changeable. Okay? Just like clothing is changeable. What's interesting to note is in this parak, the Baal Tanya right away brings in love and fear. he starts talking about these two emotions. And again, it's going back to the very beginning, which was his title page of how do we bring love and fear into our lives? That's what the whole Sefer is supposed to be about. How to create a love and fear for God and serve Hashem with true love and fear. So it makes sense that the Alter is going to now bring that in. How are our garments going to be used? How do our thoughts, speech, and action, how are they going to be used to express our love and fear to God? Okay? Now, what's interesting is to look at emotions and behavior and the correlation between the two. Our emotions give value to our behavior, right? So if I give someone a present and I do it in a way that I deeply love this person and I write a card with that present. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, I just gave Hanukkah presents to the teachers, and almost all the teachers who got back to me were like, the present was really nice, but the card, right? The card, because that's our emotional self, right? That's what they're seeing. They're seeing that the behavior that you did is important to me because of the emotion that was attached to it, the intention that was attached to it. It became special. It was given credence and importance because of the emotion, right? Because of the investment or the care or the love that was put into it. And what's interesting is the opposite is true as well. So our behavior gives value to our emotions, which is funny too, right? So we said it's pretty easy for us to understand how our emotions give value to our actions, to our behaviors. How do our behaviors, right? So like, let's say the way that we're expressing ourselves or the mitzvahs give value to our emotions, because if I do an action and it has no investment in it, right? I'm not really creating connection with that other person, right? So then the action itself is not really considered anything, right? The flip side. So if I gave that present, or if I decided I wanted to bond with someone, I didn't want to bond with someone, they pressured me into it and I got lunch with them. There's nothing there if I'm not actually feeling, right? So in ways, our actions are also very much balanced or very much dependent on the emotions as well. Both of them work one and the same together. So the reason why the Baal Tanya is bringing this in is because you can't really talk about the garments of the soul if you're not going to actually talk about the love and fear behind it as well. Because if you're doing that action without love and fear, then it's going to affect the action. And again, not to say, it's very important to know this, okay? Side notes, big red letters, disclaimer. Don't feel like if you're going to do a mitzvah and you're not going to have love and fear or proper relationship with God while you're doing that mitzvah, that it's not worth it to do it. It's still worth it to give the tzedakah and to give the present to the teacher and to get together with someone who pressured you into doing it, whatever it is. It's still very important to do the mitzvahs. The actions are crucial. And in the realm more of theory and in learning, it's also important to note that the two are very much related and they help one another and they reflect one another. So, okay, it's just important to put that disclaimer out. If you want to do a mitzvah, even if you're not feeling like it, still do it, okay? Okay, so what's interesting to think about is now our thoughts and our heart, right? So our thoughts, which are understanding how important Hashem is, and then our heart, which is feeling towards Hashem. So like, let's say, I know it's a good thing to daven every day. I know that it's important to give tzedakah, or to have Avos Yisrael, or to, and Yud Mitzvahs, keep Shabbos. And my heart is not really feeling it. I'm not feeling passionate about it. I'm not feeling like I care about that person. I'm feeling resentful about giving the tzedakah, whatever it is. So how to navigate our life in understanding that it's important to understand the mitzvahs and at the same time also to feel for the mitzvahs. The two are not mutually exclusive. You have to have both. There's this really interesting, I think it's a story or a mashal, I'm not very sure, but it could be either, of a man who was he had a farm. He understood how to take care of animals, and he understood how to serve Hashem, but he also couldn't read and write. So he hired a mechanech, a teacher, to teach his children how to read and write, but he himself could not. And one day he got a letter from his father's hometown and he couldn't read it. So he asked the Melamed to read it for him. So the Melamed reads it out loud. And the contents of the letter were basically describing how this man, this farmer, how his father had passed away. And he heard the news and he fell into a faint. And they revived him, and obviously he was very sad. But the Melamed asked him, he said, it's like such an interesting question, but that's why I think it's a mashal. The Melamed asked him, he says, I'm the one who understood this letter. I understood the contents of this letter. I'm the one who was able to read it and say it, right? So the thought, speech, and action were all there, all mine. And then you're the one who just witnessed it. You just heard about it. You're like a step removed from what I was able to do. And yet, at the same time, when I said this, you fainted and I didn't faint. Why is that? And so the farmer responds, because he's not your father. Right? So the mashal is like very simplistic. You're like, well, who asked a question like that? Obviously, it's his father. Obviously, he's going to faint. Obviously, it's very painful. But the understanding behind the story, the explanation behind the story is very interesting. When you're just linked to things being cold, hard facts and everything just being intellectual, so your thought, speech, and action is going to be intellectual in ways removed. And this person, right, he was personally invested and he was very emotional. He didn't have the thought, speech, and action, the intellectual part of it. He just had the hearing of it. And yet he had this very emotional reaction. So you could see the advantage is the disadvantage for both, right? If someone is just in the realm of emotional and is not intellectual and he's just having this fiery love for God and he's just passionate about it, but he doesn't really understand anything and it's not really grounded in any way, and it's not in a way that he could translate into reading, writing, learning Torah, doing the mitzvahs, then it's just passion. And then the person who he's just learning or he's just reading and he's just intellectual, then he's not feeling the passion. He's not having that experience. You need to have both. They're not something that you can have one and not the other. Of course, we all have our own way that we're inclined towards, but what's important is that we're supposed to be able to have both. There's another interesting story that I didn't know about, but I just heard about 3 different students of the Alter Rebbe. And what's interesting, and I also didn't know this, was that the Alter Rebbe was Rebbe for so long that he actually had 3 different generations of Talmidim. I didn't know this. I know. So there's like Elder Chassidim who were like incredible, like each one almost like a Rebbe unto himself, like tremendous Chassidim who deeply understood Chassidus. I mean, all of them in comparison to us are like that. But then there was the second tier of Chassidim who, I'll just tell you their names. So the first one of them was Zalman Zezmer. This is what the story is going to be about, 3 different ones from 3 different generations. So one of them was Zalman Zezmer, a complete intellectual, and he was known by everybody that he was cold hard facts and a complete genius, like almost like a computer genius, in the way that he looked at the world and understood concepts. Like concepts didn't have to develop for him; they were just there. There's no processing part of his brain. It was just understood, done. Move on to the next. Then there's Rav Isaac Humler's generation, which were incredible, obviously Chassidim in and of themselves. And then there was this other chassid whose name was Rav Pesach. And they're all 3 sitting together and they're farbrengen. And obviously when they're farbrengen, they're going to be a little bit more loose. And this Rav Pesach, who's technically 40 years younger than Rav Zalman, mentions to Rav Zalman, I want to give you a bracha that your heart should feel one day like your mind understands. And it was understood that this was not really something appropriate for him to say to someone who was 40 years older, 40 years his senior. And it was like a little bit uncomfortable. Like, well, you can't say something like that to an Elder Chassid, that your heart should feel one day like your mind understands. He was basically giving him a little bit of a critique, saying that you're a little bit lacking in an area. And what's interesting is Rav Isaac Humler, when he recounts this story, the 2 takeaways that he has was Rav Zalman's integrity, that he heard it. He heard what this man said. He received it. Even though he already knew this, he knew this about, everyone knew this about him. But it was something that he said, if someone's bringing this to me, if someone's saying this to me, there's a reason why I'm hearing this. And the other takeaway that Rev Isaac also had about Rev Pesach was the mysterious nefesh that Rev Pesach had in order to say it. He didn't want to say it. It's uncomfortable. It's not his place to say. And he overcame himself and he said, I don't know what the consequences are going to be for saying something like this, but I think it has to be said. Obviously, this is at a Farbrengen with really, truly God-fearing people who don't have egos involved. And it's a tremendous thing, obviously, to think about and to witness. But what's so beautiful about this story is the very message is you can't just be an intellectual person. You have to also have the emotions. You also have to have the feelings. It's not something you can't just serve Hashem with your mind. And you can't just serve Hashem with your thought, speech, and action, with just the garments. You have to bring the emotions because the emotions give value to your behaviors. And they can't just stand alone. It's really important to bring that in. So now we understand the importance of it, but how do we actually translate having a love and fear for Hashem? How are we actually going to bring that into our behaviors? That is going to, again, be the topic of this entire Sefer. Right? That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to remember. But the Alter Rebbe is bringing it in again because it's important to relate it to every single aspect of his explanation. Why is it important to understand begadim, that our thought, speech, and action are supposed to be God-oriented? Because it gives value to our emotions, and our emotions give value to our behaviors. That's why we're talking about this. If we're going to be doing a mitzvah, we want to be able to do that mitzvah with a love and fear of God, with connection. The whole point over here is that we're supposed to establish connection with Hashem. It's not just about making sure that my whole entire day is going to be like a tzaddik's day. That's not the point. The point is that we have a relationship with Hashem. And relationship is based on, yes, of course, doing, right? Doing actions, that interaction of caring about the other person, then the emotional, the feelings for that other person, intellectual, understanding that you are compatible for one another. But more than anything, it's the relationship, and everything that we do to create that relationship is going to be discussed here throughout the entire Tanya. But here, where he's talking about begadim, it's important to, again, to bring in love and fear. Yes? Okay, any questions? No? Okay. I don't want to go into the last part. I want to make sure that we're not over time. Okay. I don't want to go into the last part because it's such a, should we do it really quickly? I don't want to chop it up. And it's such a powerful concept. I'm going to leave it for next week, next time we meet, God willing. I'll just give you a little preview. The Alter Rebbe now goes into behaviors, and he talks about what our behaviors are supposed to be. Our behaviors, he says, are supposed to be mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs. Learning Hashem's Torah, learning Hashem's wisdom, and he's going to discuss what that means to learn Hashem's wisdom. And then our actions are supposed to be what Hashem wants us to do, those mitzvahs, and how to express those with love and fear. What's beautiful about what he's going to continue on to say is what the impact on our relationship with God is when we engage with Torah and mitzvahs. What happens when you link your mind with Hashem's mind, when you link your actions with Hashem's actions, and what happens to the relationship when you use the magic of Torah and mitzvahs in order to connect. But it's too much to talk about in 10 minutes. So I just want to leave it for next class. In the next class, we'll talk about the entire concept. Yeah? Okay. Any questions so far or takeaways? Anything that you found relatable?
There's an expression that if you do the actions, the feelings follow.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
The-
If you do the actions, the feelings will follow. Yeah, that's true. Be real until you feel real, right? It's a beautiful concept.
Becomes more meaningful, I guess, when you look back and you're like, maybe I should just have a little more. My question is like, the fear, are you gonna go more into the fear and the love, the next, that's what you were saying, the next class?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And throughout the entire course, we're going to be talking about love and fear because that's what we're trying to get towards. But there's like all these explanations on how important it is and what it actually means. It's all so much depth
That's
here.
what I want to ask you. For someone's like imagine for someone's like coming in and like doesn't understand the whole concept, like why do I have to fear God if I'm loving him like that? I don't get it.
Mm,
Like if I love my husband, do I also have to fear him? Like because our relationship with God is so much relationship with God. That concept of fear is like so interesting, but I'm excited for the next class to see like where it goes with that concept of this fear. Like,
I mean, the fear part, I could answer you right now. So just like since the beginning, we've been redefining all words that come to play, meaning all the words that we say that we think we know the connotations about, the Alter Rebbe takes and he says, that's not what we're talking about here. So when we say fear, right, especially like, let's say bringing your fear, right, the fear to your husband, what does that mean? You're supposed to fear your husband? That doesn't sound safe, right? We want to believe that our husbands are safe. So that's not what we're talking about here. When we talk about fear, we're saying respect. And respect means giving space. It's an awe factor. It's where I deeply want to witness and see and give space to Hashem. Right? There's something, this is greater than me. This is something that contributes to me. It makes me feel a little bit humble, not like I have everything in the world and I got this and I have everything under control. That's what awe is. It's literally could just literally be recognizing that Hashem has an influence in your life. That's awe. That's fear of God, right? And let's say a fear of, or let's say the idea of, I don't want him to see me do something that's wrong. Like, let's say you respect someone deeply and you don't want them to see you messing up. The idea behind that is you so deeply respect them, you're in awe of them, you want them to think of you as your greatest self, right? So that's what it is. Not so much fear as opposed to like awe and respect. Yeah.
someone else that we relationship with to see you not mess up, for example. But for some reason, like in my life, I feel like I care more about what someone else will see than Hashem. Like it's like Hashem sees every single move I make and every thought I have. For some reason, I care more about like I rather like I apply that fear more to like people in my life than Hashem. It's an interesting concept. Like, I don't think about it. We don't think about it as humans. I don't know. Like Hashem, like we don't see him physically. I don't know. It's a deep concept. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah. It's huge. And by the way, very relatable, that idea, right? We wouldn't want someone, that's why, people on vacation, they do all sorts of things when they're on vacation. When they come back home, they're not going to do those things, right? It's the same thing. And I also feel like it ties along with like sometimes a person, a woman or a man will talk to their spouse in a certain way that they would never talk to somebody else that way. Yeah. It's something along, for some reason, it has the same line of reasoning. And it's not true, but right? It's not true that Hashem's not witnessing me at every moment. I just can't think about it. It's too much. And it's not true that I really am speaking that way to my spouse when I wouldn't speak that way to anybody else. Like, that's not really who I am. That's not the way I want to interact. It's just other factors.
Fear, quote unquote, that word, then it starts to like hit you. Like, when why am I connected to this person than my like, why am I like caring so much what other people think rather than Hashem thinks of me? And I feel like when you have that fear, now that you explain it to me, it's like that respect, that space, but also that level of not too much comfort. Where I love Hashem, I'm comfortable with Hashem, but like I don't want to get too comfortable with Hashem because then it'll be a reverse thing where it's like I'm the way you describe it, I really appreciate it. Help me understand more that concept of fear.
Sure. You're welcome. It's just a funny story that came up when you were saying that. I remember when I was younger, I knew two people who got engaged. And I don't know how I knew this story, this interaction. Someone told me the story about them. They got engaged, they got married, and like within the first week, the husband was eating and like a bit of ketchup got on his shirt. And the wife was like, okay, are you going to go change your shirt? And he was like, no, because we already got married. This is not my story, I'm just telling you. And the idea was, right, like, I don't have to change my shirt anymore. Like, we're not dating. There's this very comfortable feeling, like, you're not going to leave me just because I have a ketchup stain on my shirt. And she said, no, you still have to change your shirt, right? You still have to respect me. You still have to try to woo me. You still have to try to win me over all the time. And what I love about that story is not necessarily her telling him what to do, but the idea is that there's the love and the fear, right? Yes, there's love. We got married. We're connected. We're committed to each other. And still have to have the respect, right? You still have to have that constant awe of the other person and want to impress them. And that's in a beautiful way, not in, a codependent or unhealthy way. Okay, beautiful. Thank you all for being here. We want to wish you all a beautiful Freilich and Hanukkah. You should have so much joy in your world and spread it to everybody else through the garments of your soul. And wishing you a beautiful week. Happy Hanukkah.